How could anyone be jealous of a child? A child whose only crime was wanting love. Imagine being 6 years old, your world filled with toys, cartoons, and bedtime stories. But behind closed doors, someone hates you for the attention you receive. This is the heartbreaking story of Nicolas Kuras, a bright-eyed little boy who never got the chance to grow up because of one woman's twisted jealousy. Before we touch on this shocking story, kindly take a second to subscribe to this channel. Thank you, and we love you so much. Now let's get into it. Nicholas wasn't just a name in a headline. He was a son, a giggle in the hallway, a soft whisper of "I love you" at bedtime. But to Hilary Ulp, he was a rival. His innocence became the target of an unimaginable cruelty. A story like this forces us to confront a painful question. How does love turn into something so dark, so deadly? Today we're going to tell Nicholas's story, not just to relive the horror, but to remember him and never forget. Nicolas Kuras was the kind of child who could light up a room with just his smile. His laughter was the pure, unfiltered kind that only children possess. A sound that made even the hardest days feel a little lighter. His big, curious eyes sparkled with wonder, always eager to explore the world around him. Nicholas loved simple things: the thrill of chasing bubbles in the yard, the joy of cuddling his favorite stuffed animal, and the warmth of his father's embrace. He was just 6 years old with a future full of dreams that would never have the chance to unfold. His father was his hero. They shared an unbreakable bond, one built on bedtime stories, piggyback rides, and whispered "I love yous" before sleep. Nicholas would light up every time his dad walked into the room, his little legs racing to be scooped up into strong, loving arms. To Nicholas, his father's attention wasn't just affection, it was his whole world. But what should have been a beautiful relationship became the very thing that sparked a dangerous jealousy in Hilary Ulp. Hilary couldn't stand the love Nicholas received. In her twisted mind, his existence was a threat, a tiny, innocent rival for the affection she craved from his father. Imagine that, a grown woman feeling envy towards a child, not understanding that a parent's love is infinite, not a pie to be divided. But Hilary didn't see it that way. She saw Nicholas as competition. While Nicholas sought comfort in his father's arms, Hilary's resentment grew like a dark cloud, looming over his young life. Behind closed doors, the warmth of family faded, replaced by cold stares and cruel intentions. Nicola, too young to understand the shift, felt it in the silence, the sudden absence of kindness from the woman who should have protected him. He was just a little boy, craving love and safety. But instead of toys and bedtime kisses, his world became one of fear and confusion. Yet even amidst the darkness, Nicholas's spirit shone. He clung to the hope that his father's love could shield him from the growing storm. This is the heartbreaking reality. Nicolas Kuras didn't just lose his life. He was robbed of his childhood, his innocence, and the chance to grow up. A little boy whose only crime was loving his father too much in the eyes of someone consumed by jealousy. On the surface, Hilary Ulp appeared to be just another woman trying to find her place in the world. She was 46 years old with a seemingly ordinary life, blending into the background of a suburban Michigan. To neighbors and casual acquaintances, she might have seemed polite, even friendly. But beneath that mask of normalcy lurked a darkness, a festering resentment fueled by jealousy and insecurity. Hilary's relationship with Nicholas's father began like many others. She craved companionship, someone to fill the emptiness she carried inside. But soon it wasn't enough. Her affection wasn't just for the man. It turned into an obsession, one that couldn't tolerate competition, not even from an innocent child. The more she saw the bond between father and son, the more bitterness gnawed at her. To Hilary, Nicholas wasn't a child. He was an obstacle, a reminder that she would never be the center of attention. The jealousy grew quietly at first. A cold glance here, a dismissive comment there. But jealousy is a seed that thrives in darkness, and Hilary's resentment flourished in silence. She masked it well, putting on a smile when others were watching. No one could have guessed the storm brewing beneath. Friends noticed little things: her possessiveness, her quick temper when the topic of Nicholas came up. But nothing alarming enough to raise red flags until it was too late. Behind closed doors, the tension escalated. Hilary resented every moment Nicholas's father spent with his son, every laugh they shared, every bedtime story read. She saw love as a currency, and in her twisted mind, Nicholas was bankrupting her. The fragile facade of a normal relationship crumbled as her envy consumed her, transforming into something far more sinister. Hilary Ulp wasn't just a woman scorned by jealousy, she became a predator hiding behind an ordinary smile. And for little Nicholas, that smile masked a danger more profound than anyone could have imagined. Hilary Ulp didn't wear the face of a monster. On the surface, she seemed like any other woman, a 46-year-old trying to find companionship, to piece together the remnants of a life she felt slipping through her fingers. But beneath that seemingly ordinary exterior was a festering darkness, a silent rage born from jealousy that would spiral into unimaginable cruelty. She met Nicholas's father during a time when both were searching for connection. To him, Hilary seemed kind, attentive, a woman eager to be part of his life. But Hilary wasn't just looking for love. She was looking for control. And there was one obstacle she couldn't stand, a 6-year-old boy named Nicholas. Nicholas wasn't just his father's son. He was the center of his world. Every laugh, every bedtime story, every proud glance was a reminder to Hilary that she would never come first. At first, the jealousy simmered quietly, hidden behind forced smiles and clenched fists. But jealousy doesn't stay quiet for long. It started with passive-aggressive comments, small, cutting remarks disguised as jokes. "Wow, he's really got you wrapped around his little finger, huh?" she'd say with a forced laugh, her eyes betraying the bitterness beneath. When Nicholas asked for his father's attention, Hilary's smiles grew tighter, her tone colder. She'd roll her eyes when the boy wasn't looking, sigh dramatically when his father got up to help with homework or tuck him into bed. But jealousy is like a weed. Left unchecked, it grows, choking out everything good. Hilary's frustration turned into petty acts of cruelty. She'd conveniently forget to pack Nicholas's favorite snacks, dismiss his tears with cold indifference, and criticize him for being too needy. When she thought no one was watching, her glares grew sharper, her voice harsher. Then the small acts weren't enough. The frustration boiled over, spilling into moments she couldn't control. A slammed door when Nicholas cried too loudly. A harsh grip on his tiny arm under the guise of discipline. The tension in the house thickened, invisible to outsiders but suffocating to those living within its walls. It started with words, sharp glances, but jealousy has a way of growing, poisoning everything it touches. What began as quiet resentment morphed into something sinister, a dark obsession fueled by the belief that if she couldn't have his father's undivided attention, then no one would. Not even an innocent little boy named Nicola. It was an ordinary day, the kind that should have been filled with laughter and warmth, a Saturday morning with cartoons humming softly in the background, and cereal bowls clinking on the kitchen table. But beneath the fragile facade of normalcy, a storm was brewing. The air was thick with unspoken resentment, jealousy simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it. Nicholas's father had left for work early that morning, leaving his son in Hilary's care. For most, this would have been routine. But for Nicholas, it was a silent sentence to endure hours with the woman whose smiles were filled with hidden daggers. The tension had been building for weeks, perhaps months, with every innocent giggle, every "daddy, look at me," chipping away at Hilary's fragile sense of control. The morning began with small frustrations. Nicholas spilled his juice, his cartoons were too loud, and he accidentally broke a small trinket Hilary cherished. Each mishap was like a match striking against the frayed edges of Hilary's patience. "Why can't you just be quiet for once?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to make Nicholas flinch. His small face crumpled, not understanding why he was always in trouble, why nothing he did was ever right. He tried to apologize, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Hilary. I didn't mean to." But jealousy doesn't accept apologies. It festers, it grows, and on that day it exploded. Hilary's rage erupted like a dam breaking. She grabbed Nicholas roughly, her grip leaving bruises that would tell a story long after the words faded. She shouted words no child should ever hear, her face twisted with an anger far too large for a 6-year-old to comprehend. The violence escalated quickly, too quickly. She hit him with a force fueled not by discipline, but by deep, consuming hatred. The blows rained down, relentless and merciless, as if punishing him for a crime he never committed. Nicholas's small body couldn't withstand the assault. His cries grew weaker, softer, until they faded into a haunting silence that would echo long after that day.
When the rage subsided, Hilary was left standing over the fragile body of a little boy whose light had been extinguished. Panic set in, not the panic of remorse, but of consequence. She tried to cover her tracks, called emergency services with a fabricated story, claiming it was an accident. But the truth was written all over Nicholas's broken body, bruises, fractures, and the haunting stillness of a child who should have been running, laughing, living. At the hospital, doctors fought to save him, their efforts valiant but ultimately in vain. Nicholas's injuries were too severe: blunt force trauma to the head, a broken collarbone, multiple fractured ribs. His tiny body had endured more than most adults could bear. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Nicholas slipped away, leaving behind a father shattered by grief and a trail of questions that screamed for justice. In the aftermath, as investigators pieced together the horrific puzzle, the truth emerged. The signs had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. The passive-aggressive comments, the unexplained bruises, the fear in Nicholas's eyes. Each ignored warning was another stitch in the tragic tapestry of a life cut short. In the place where he should have felt safest, Nicholas faced his worst nightmare. And the person who was supposed to protect him became the reason he'd never wake up again. Nicholas's fight didn't end the day Hilary's rage left him battered and broken. His fragile body may have succumbed to the injuries, but the shadow of that violence lingered for years, haunting not just his small, struggling form, but the hearts of those who loved him most. After that fateful day, Nicholas was rushed into a world of sterile hospital rooms, humming machines, and whispered prayers. He clung to life with a resilience that belied his fragile frame. Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a testament to a spirit that refused to give in, even when his body was too broken to keep up the fight. His father, crushed by guilt and grief, sat by his side, holding his tiny hand, silently begging for forgiveness, for leaving him, for trusting someone who didn't deserve it, for not seeing the signs. How do you live knowing that the very person you welcomed into your child's life became the reason they were taken from you? That question would haunt him, echoing through sleepless nights and hollow days. Nicholas's injuries weren't just physical. The trauma carved deep scars into his father's soul. Memories of bedtime stories and playful laughter were now tainted by the harsh reality of hospital beeps and tear-soaked goodbyes. The man who once protected his son from monsters under the bed had to face the devastating truth. Sometimes, the real monsters live right beside us, hiding in plain sight. As Nicholas's fragile fight for life stretched on, it became clear that the damage was irreversible. His once bright eyes, filled with curiosity and innocence, grew dim. Eventually, the machines went silent, marking the end of a life stolen too soon. But grief doesn't end when a heartbeat does. For Nicholas's family, it grew heavier with each passing day. Birthdays without candles to blow out, empty chairs at the dinner table, and the deafening absence of a child's laughter, all cruel reminders of what was lost. Nicholas's story is more than a tragedy. It's a haunting reflection of how fragile life can be. His family's grief is a testament to a love so deep that even death can't erase it. And as they carry the unbearable weight of his absence, the question lingers: how do you move forward when your heart is trapped in the past?
The courtroom was a stark contrast to the warmth Nicolas' presence once brought into the world, a place cold with sterile walls and heavy with the burden of justice. As the trial began, every eye was fixed on Hilary Ulp, the woman who had stolen a child's future. She sat there, emotionless, her face a mask of indifference, as if the life she'd destroyed was nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of the horror Nicolas endured, each piece of evidence a brutal reminder of his suffering. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting from shock to silent rage. Testimonies from medical professionals detailed the extent of Nicolas' injuries, while heart-wrenching statements from family members pierced the courtroom's somber air. Nicolas's father took the stand, his voice trembling with grief and fury. His words weren't just for the jury, they were for Hilary. "You took my son, my world. You didn't just break his body, you shattered our lives." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, the weight of his pain echoing louder than any gavel ever could. Throughout it all, Hilary remained unmoved. No tears, no signs of remorse, just a blank stare, as if she were an outsider to her own monstrous acts. Her defense tried to paint her as troubled, struggling with her own demons. But the jury saw through the facade. They saw the truth hidden behind her cold eyes. For Nicolas' family, the verdict was a form of justice, but it was far from closure. No sentence could bring back the boy whose laughter once filled their lives. As they left the courtroom, tears mixed with the faintest sense of relief. Justice had been served, but the wounds would remain forever. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the warmth Nicolas' presence once brought into the world, a place cold with sterile walls and heavy with the burden of justice. As the trial began, every eye was fixed on Hilary Ulp, the woman who had stolen a child's future. She sat there, emotionless, her face a mask of indifference, as if the life she'd destroyed was nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of the horror Nicolas endured, each piece of evidence a brutal reminder of his suffering. The jury listened intently, their expressions shifting from shock to silent rage. Testimonies from medical professionals detailed the extent of Nicolas' injuries, while heart-wrenching statements from family members pierced the courtroom's somber air. Nicolas' father took the stand, his voice trembling with grief and fury. His words weren't just for the jury, they were for Hilary. "You took my son, my world. You didn't just break his body, you shattered our lives." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, the weight of his pain echoing louder than any gavel ever could. Throughout it all, Hilary remained unmoved. No tears, no signs of remorse, just a blank stare, as if she were an outsider to her own monstrous acts. Her defense tried to paint her as troubled, struggling with her own demons. But the jury saw through the facade. They saw the truth hidden behind her cold eyes. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty of first-degree felony murder. The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. When Judge Diane Druzinski delivered the mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole, her voice was firm, her words a sharp contrast to Hilary's emotionless demeanor. "This court finds no redeeming qualities in your actions. You showed no mercy to an innocent child, and today, this court shows none to you." For Nicolas' family, the verdict was a form of justice, but it was far from closure. No sentence could bring back the boy whose laughter once filled their lives. As they left the courtroom, tears mixed with the faintest sense of relief. Justice had been served, but the wounds would remain forever. Even with justice served, a question lingers, a question that echoes in the hearts of everyone who hears Nicolas' story. How did this happen? How did a child so full of life fall through the cracks of a society meant to protect him? Were there signs hidden in plain sight, overlooked by those who could have intervened? Did neighbors, friends, or even family sense something was wrong, but choose silence over action? Jealousy isn't always harmless. Sometimes it festers, growing in the shadows where no one thinks to look. It hides behind forced smiles, polite conversations, and the illusion of normalcy. Hilary's jealousy was a poison, subtle at first, sharp glances, dismissive comments, but it grew unchecked until it claimed an innocent life. This isn't just a story about one woman's cruelty. It's about the fragile systems we rely on to protect the vulnerable, systems that missed the red flags, that didn't ask enough questions, that didn't see past the surface. As we reflect on Nicolas' tragic story, we must ask ourselves, are we paying enough attention? Are we willing to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable? Because sometimes the difference between life and death isn't just the actions of a monster, it's the silence of those who looked away. Nicolas' story is a heartbreaking reminder, not just of what was lost, but of what could have been prevented.